Dogs in Belarus versus dogs in California. I would say the US. However, I don't know how dogs are in all of the US. And I'm sure if you go to the middle of nowhere, people aren't going to be chopping their balls off. But in California, in a lot of the cities of the US, people chop their dogs' balls off. They like to call it neutering. Oh, you're just neutering the dog. Oh, if it's a female, oh, you're just spaying her. I'm not sure exactly what they do when they spay a female, but maybe they pull the ovaries out, maybe they cut them. It's crazy. For male dogs, they literally cut the balls off. In Belarus, that's like animal abuse. I'm not sure if it's actually legally considered animal abuse, but if you talk to people, they think it's absolutely insane. So that's a pretty interesting difference. What's also interesting is people think of like Belarus and Russia as like cold, hard places. You wouldn't really imagine that there's dogs everywhere. And maybe there weren't 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but I've noticed that compared right now to a few years ago, there's a lot of dogs. And people don't use leashes unless they're like in a really crowded part of the city, or you're like walking your dog and you like along a busy road. Like, I don't know why you would choose to walk your dog right along a busy road unless you like somehow only live where that's the only place to walk, but it's like it doesn't work out like that. You got apartment buildings everywhere that create mazes between the apartment buildings, so people are going to walk in between the apartment buildings. And if you don't live with a bunch of apartment buildings, it means you live kind of outside the city, which means there's also not just roads everywhere. So it's almost like no matter where you walk your dog, unless it's in the very center of the city, you don't need to use a leash, and people don't. But again, in the center of the city, the very center, where it's very busy, lots of little streets and stuff, lots of cars, yeah, people do use leashes. California, on the other hand, it is illegal to walk your dog without a leash, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but I think so. Because I know there are areas where it is legal to not have a leash, which implies that it's illegal to not have a leash in the other areas. What's also really cool is in California and a lot of the US, the cities, you can't just walk into a store with your dog. Well, California now, probably you could just do it, and I mean, police don't enforce laws anymore, so may as well just do it. But stores don't allow you and don't like if you just walk in with your dog. You don't go to a restaurant or a bar and just walk in with your dog. And if you do, you certainly don't take it off the leash and let it start going around the store or the restaurant. And I've only trained, well, actually, I've been on a couple trains in California throughout my whole life. But I certainly imagine that it is not acceptable to bring your dog on the train without a leash and let it just wander around. Here, I've actually been on a train, and it's funny, it's the guy with the dog, he fell asleep. I didn't even know whose dog it was, but I'm sitting, and there's a guy with a dog next to him. So I assumed it's his dog. I'm like, Mojna, like, can I pet your dog? Because my wife, years ago, she was under the impression that people don't like when you pet their dogs. And once again, that shows that things have changed, because now it's like people think you're crazy if you ask if you can pet their dog. They're like, of course you can pet my dog. But people used to be less friendly about that. And the guy goes like that. So I start petting his dog. Dog comes right next to me. And I'm just hanging out with the dog. And everyone probably thinks it's my dog because it's with me most of the time. But what's funny is, like, an hour later, this guy wakes up who's sleeping, and he starts. At this point, I think the dog had wandered off. It wasn't still with me. I don't remember exactly, but he starts like looking for his dog, and like I don't remember what his dog's name was, but he starts like yelling the name and looking around, and he finds it eventually and tells the dog to come to him. But then he falls asleep again, and the dog wanders around, comes by me. Pretty funny, because I thought like every person who gets on this train or who just happens to walk up and down the aisle probably thinks I brought my dog on the train and don't have it on a leash because it's right next to me, and I'm the only. Sadly, I was the other guy who I thought it was his dog. He petted it like a few pets, but besides those few pets, I was the only person petting it. The dog would go up to other people, and they would just be like, so yeah, it was like my dog for the train ride. And it would just lay down in the middle of the aisle. Even the train workers that come by and they'd step over it. It was only a mid-sized dog, not a large dog. Uh, yeah, pretty cool that you can just bring your dog on the train, let it wander around, let it lay in the middle. And I've been to bars here and restaurants, and people, not only do they bring their dog in, but they just let it wander around. There are no dog signs on certain grocery stores. I haven't noticed them on restaurants, but even on the grocery stores that have no dog signs, people bring their dogs in. Yeah, California. Now I know there's a lot of whack job policies. Like now you can even. It used to be you could have a seeing eye dog if you were blind, but now you can have an emotional support dog or animal or whatever because you're depressed, and you can bring it places legally. But even if it's not your emotional support animal, considering that police don't enforce laws anymore, you can probably just bring your dog wherever you want, but you might still have problems with the people that run the establishment. Yeah, a lot more rare to see people walking their dogs without a leash. If you're in a neighborhood that's a quiet, calm neighborhood, perhaps you will. If you're in a private neighborhood, perhaps you will. But if you're just walking around in general, most people use leashes, whereas here, most people do not use leashes. I like that. I think it's great. It makes me even more want to have a dog here. And in case you haven't noticed, my English keeps changing and getting worse because I don't hear any native English speakers here. So, like I just said, it makes me more want to. Like, it makes me. It's hard for me to even think of the normal way to say things now because I've adopted the foreigner patterns of speech that I hear every day. And of course, naturally, you speak them back to people because you know that's what they'll understand. Yeah, pretty awesome. Minsk, especially. If you love dogs, it's the place to come. You can never use a leash practically. You can bring it in pretty much everywhere. You don't even have to put it on a leash when you bring it in. I'm sure if you had a really big dog and you don't have it on a leash and you bring it into the shopping mall, someone might not like that, especially if it starts going up to the clothes and getting its hair all over the clothes. But if you're in like the food court, well, if you're in the food court, you better hope your dog doesn't start eating people's food. But I've seen dogs in the food court, but they weren't trying to eat people's food. I've seen dogs in bars, but they weren't trying to drink people's beer. Yeah, dogs on the train weren't trying to steal anybody's seat. So as long as your dog is well behaved, you can pretty much like go anywhere with it.